This museum label says a hermit kneels down to admire a sleeping woman's beauty. But the poem the painting originated from actually says he tried to rape her. Why is the museum lying? This painting from Rubens, called Angelica and the Hermit, was painted in the 17th century. Today we can find it in the Art History Museum in Vienna. The label describes a love story. A hermit in love with the beautiful Angelica bewitches her horse that carries her across the ocean to a remote island. And he makes her drink a sleeping poison so the hermit can kneel before her and admire her beauty. The label describes it like it's an almost tender event. But that's not what the poem describes. And if you look closer, you can actually see it on the painting. The poem I'm talking about is Orlando Furioso, Canto 8. It comes from the 16th century and was written by the artist Ariosto. In the story, Angelica is on the run. She asks an old hermit the way to the sea. He is inflamed with lust, bewitches a demon, and drives it into her horse. Her horse then carries her way across the ocean, and she lands in a cave. And there in the cave, she's weeping, because her beauty has brought her nothing but misfortune. And then all of a sudden, the hermit appears, and he comes to comfort her. Then he sprinkles a sleeping drug over her eyes and tries to rape her, but he fails because he's too old. Soon after, pirates find Angelica and carry her off as a sacrifice to the sea monster. So, if we look at the poem, we see that there are two things that don't match the museum label. First thing is a tiny detail, but she doesn't drink the poison, he actually sprinkles it above her eyes. But the most important one is that there's no real admiring, there's an attempt to rape her. So why would the museum choose to talk about admiration? If we look closer at the painting itself and you zoom in on the hermit's hands, you see that with one hand he holds the cloth very close to his heart, and the other one he uses to rip off the cloth so you could see her naked body. In one position, the hermit makes two opposite gestures, one of longing and one of exposure. His hands are actually in service of his eyes. The demon sits above her head, and her face seems almost peaceful. And it's precisely that, because when you first look at the painting, it seems almost beautiful instead of horrifying. But Rubens didn't actually invent this subject. In Venice, he studied a version by Tintoretto. Angelica is laying in a beautiful garden instead of a cave. Her eyes are wide open. The hermit doesn't even touch her. We don't see his hands. And instead of a demon looming, there's an owl. That owl is a bit of an unclear message, because in the tradition of Minerva, the owl stands for wisdom, as if it might tell him to think rather than seize in this moment. But in the Christian tradition, the owl is actually a sign of darkness. It's the bird of the night. Both meanings stay open, but attention might be the point. So the most interesting part for me is that actually the non-violent moment, the one farthest away from the poem, is actually earlier than the Rubens version. So you might say that Rubens actually goes more into the violence and stays closer to the poem, whilst the older version from Tintoretto totally overshadows this crime. So when I was thinking more in depth about this idea, I actually thought of something that German philosopher Friedrich Hegel said. He once wrote that the soul appears in the light of the eyes. So if we hold up two paintings against that, we see that Rubens' version closed the eyes, but Tintoretto actually opened the eyes. It's like Angelica in Tintoretto's version was an actual subject in the painting, like she was awake, and Rubens' version actually made her more of this beautiful object because he chose to close her eyes. But then a third layer is the medium. Painting is actually made to be looked at. And we look at it like it's just an artwork. And every time I think this concept, the German philosopher Nietzsche comes to mind, because he calls this totally hypocritic. Because he calls this totally hypocritic. He argues that it's actually that little word art that lets us calmly enjoy something that we rather judge. So, the answer to why the museum tells us a story about admiration when the original poem talks about rape is in the painting itself. Rubens didn't choose to paint the resistance or the assault, he painted the moment in between. She sleeps defenselessness, whilst the hermit leans over her and admires. The museum simply described what was painted. The softening of the poem didn't happen on the label, but it happened on the painting 400 years ago.